Ich muss dem amerikanischen Volk eine Botschaft zukommen lassen. Sie sollen alles über HAARP erfahren.
Weißt du, was HAARP ist? Das ist ein Verteidigungsprogramm, das Radiowellen in die Troposphäre schickt. Sie tun so, als wäre es für die Klimaforschung. Aber was es tatsächlich ist, kannst du dir überhaupt nicht vorstellen. Seine Auswirkungen auf das Klima, die Natur, selbst auf die Menschen sind verheerend. Sie testen es in Alaska. Wir können das nicht zulassen. Wir müssen eingreifen.
Ich möchte, dass Sie sich vorstellen, wie mächtig eine Technologie sein kann, die in der Lage ist, das Wetter zu beeinflussen. Wir könnten es in der Sahara regnen lassen. Oder vielleicht Mexiko in einen Gletscher verwandeln. Auch wenn es unfassbar scheint. Diese Technologie existiert tatsächlich.
Das HAARP-Projekt, das wurde mal erwähnt.
Willst du wissen, worum es dabei geht?
Ja.
Sieh dich um. Was glaubst du wohl hat diesen ewigen Sturm ausgelöst?
Die Natur als Waffe? Das ist schrecklich.
Nein, die Menschen spielen Gott.
Haben sich die Proteste auf 4 weitere US-Staaten ausgeweitet. Schwindende Benzinreserven lassen die Supermarktregale leer. In Texas starben bei Ausschreitungen 8 Menschen während einer Kundgebung.
Die testen da was Neues. Betty, sie wissen nicht, wie man es anwendet, aber es hat ihn noch nie interessiert. Tesla wusste es. Nachdem er halb Sibirien ausradiert hat, wusste er, dass er es verstecken muss.
Was verstecken?
Das hier. Was ist da drin?
Es ist ein alter Brief. Er ist adressiert an Professor Henderson in Falmouth, Cornwall.
Mach ihn auf.
Er ist mit der Hand geschrieben. Datiert auf den 17. November 1894. Und unterschrieben mit Ihr demütiger Kollege Nikola Tesla.
Ehrlich? Ich wünschte, ich hätte nie von den Tesla-Briefen gehört. Das Schlimmste, was mir je passiert ist.
Ihre Arbeit wurde auf den Index gesetzt?
Ich habe Unterlassungsaufforderungen von Anwälten erhalten, die sagten, meine Arbeit sei illegal, Verletzung von urheberrechtlich geschütztem Material, privaten Lizenzen. Die taten alles, um mich aufzuhalten.
Es heißt, dass Tesla für die Regierung an einem Energiestrahl gearbeitet haben soll.
Ja, Energiestrahlen, aber auch kalte Fusion, Düsentriebwerke. Tesla war seiner Zeit weit voraus. Und die Tesla-Briefe sollten in Zusammenhang mit seiner heikelsten Arbeit stehen. Ich war auf jeden Fall felsenfest davon überzeugt. Mein Job als Dozentin konnte ich gerade mal so retten. Diese Dreckskerle aus der Wirtschaft haben mich derart eingeschüchtert. Die haben mein Telefon angezapft. Die haben mich verfolgt und...
Wenn Sie so daneben lagen, wieso haben die sich solche Mühe gemacht? Warum sind Ihre Artikel zensiert worden?
Ich bin kein Freund von Verschwörungstheorien, wissen Sie?
Sekunde.
Aber Tesla verfolgte noch ein anderes Projekt, von dem er morgen nichts erzählte.
Meine Herren, danke, dass Sie gekommen sind. Ich möchte Ihnen heute hier ein Konzept vorstellen, das die menschliche Zivilisation revolutionieren wird. Diese Technik, die ich bald perfektionieren werde, wird die Welt ohne Kabel und Drähte mit Strom versorgen.
Aber Mr. Tesla, wie gedenken Sie den Stromverbrauch ohne Kabel oder Drähte zu messen?
Ich sage, kein Mensch darf unter dem schwarzen Mantel der Nacht ersticken. Wenn wir Elektrizität über die Kontinente schicken können, wird die Wissenschaft auch die dunkelsten Flecken der Natur erhellen. Verstehen Sie nicht? Teslas Wardenclyffe-Turm wird dabei helfen, einen neuen Garten Eden auf Erden entstehen zu lassen. Eine Welt, in der die Wissenschaft zum Wohle und für ein besseres Leben der Menschen dient. Freier Strom für alle Menschen.
Was? Haben Sie den Verstand verloren? Freier Strom, was soll das heißen?
Das bedeutet das Ende der Habgier.
Man sollte Sie ersäufen wie einen räudigen Hund, Sie elender Schmarotzer.
Man sagt, es ist besser, eine Kerze anzuzünden, als die Dunkelheit zu verfluchen. Und jetzt präsentiere ich Ihnen die drahtlose Energieübertragung. Und zerstörte 800 Quadratmeilen Wald in der Tunguska-Region in Sibirien. Das war kein Meteorit.
Packt alles zusammen, Jungs! Bis zur letzten Elektrode, schafft alles in die Stadt!
Mr. Morgan, warten Sie. Hören Sie mir bitte nur 5 Minuten zu.
Macht daraus ruhig Kleinholz. Das geht zu R&D.
Ich habe die Tunguska-Explosion verursacht.
Was?
Die Energie, die wir gestern Abend übertragen haben, hat die Troposphäre der Erde verändert. Das hat die Explosion in Sibirien ausgelöst. Wissen Sie, was das bedeutet? Wir können dieses Gerät doch nutzen. Und zwar für die Kontrolle des Wetters. Damit können wir es in der Sahara regnen lassen. Wir können weltweit das Wetter stabilisieren und doch noch einen Garten Eden schaffen.
Oder wir bauen eine Waffe. Die ultimative Waffe.
Dass die uns mit Vitaminen versorgen wollen. Wir haben den ganzen Bezirk abgeriegelt.
Na toll, einfach grandios.
Warum sind die so aufgebracht?
Lassen Sie uns besser verschwinden. Da.
Womit haben die uns eingenebelt? Was ist das?
Das Zeug wird Berserker genannt.
Berserker? Was ist das?
Es handelt sich um einen chemischen Wirkstoff, der gegen größere Menschenmengen angewendet werden kann, mit interessanten Auswirkungen.
Und welchen?
Bei moderater Dosierung kommt es zu Unruhen, Aufständen. Es war bereits im Einsatz im Iran, Syrien, Ägypten, im arabischen Frühling. Das waren wir.
Wenn die Leute sich gegenseitig zerfleischen, kann die Polizei sie auch niederknüppeln, ohne Sympathiepunkte zu verlieren. Das löst das Zeug aus.
Die Droge bewirkt, dass unser Selbsterhaltungstrieb quasi übersteuert wird, sowie in Stresssituationen. Und dann produziert der Körper gewaltige Mengen von Adrenalin. Der Mensch kommt in einen Zustand konstanter paranoider Erregung. Er wird gewalttätig und er verfügt über ungewöhnliche Kraft.
Ich verstehe das nicht. Normalerweise müssten die Menschen durchdrehen, untereinander bekämpfen, aber die haben sich richtig organisiert.
Berserker ist mehr als irgendein Gift. Es ruft unter den Leuten Aufstände und auch Massenunruhen hervor, ja, aber das ist erst die erste Stufe. Wir haben herausgefunden, dass wenn wir die HAARP-Technologie in kleinerem Maßstab anwenden, wir imstande sind, sie in ihrer Wut zu vereinen. Aber wie kann es sein, dass dieser Sturm niemals aufhört?
Die Versuche mit dem makroskopisch geladenen Teilchenstrom sind schiefgegangen. Das verdanken wir der DARPA.
DARPA? Die haben doch auch das Internet erfunden.
rise as they do a 10-mile high drive-by. No one knows why. I think we turn it Hush now, baby, don't you cry as grandmommy's singing you lullaby. She says, don't worry, baby, someday soon we're gonna eat the rich. The Secretary of Defense may conduct biological experiments. I guess Granny never told you sometimes life can be a bitch. Like sheep, we just wait in line, pay their taxes, and buy our time. Rats in a cage, guinea pigs on a stage. Hitler was a test, he was only a test, and now some bullshit's about to manifest. The human race has become completely enslaved. No one knows
Chemtrails are coal ash. Since the mid-1990s, persistent jet trails have appeared in the sky and have increased year after year. For 2 decades, it has been a mystery as to what the jets are spraying on us. Finally, we know the source material of these jet chemtrails. Coal ash is reprocessed to create the chemtrail base mixture. Chemtrail residues in rainwater have the same mix of toxic metals as those found in coal ash from coal-burning power plants. Such a huge amount of chemtrails is sprayed every day that there is no other source for these nanometal oxides except coal ash. Fly ash and bottom ash are created at every coal-fired power plant. Fly ash is rich in aluminum oxide, about 30%, which is the main chemical found in chemtrail rainwater tests. Coal combustion waste from power plants is the biggest industrial waste stream in the world, with about 120 million tons created each year in the USA alone. Over 50 million tons of fly ash is created in the USA each year by processing the coal combustion waste. More than 40% of U.S. coal ash production is reprocessed into cement, road base, drywall, bauxite, shingles, plastic filler, and non-publicized uses like chemtrail mix. The use of fly ash has more than doubled since chemtrails began in the mid-1990s. Chemtrails account for millions of tons of coal ash reuse every year. Secret chemtrail mix is labeled component of flowable fill in coal ash industry documents. 39% of the electricity generated in the U.S. is made by burning coal. Disposing of the ash at each coal-burning power plant is a billion-dollar problem, with most ash put in nearby landfills at a very high cost. After the Kingston, Tennessee coal ash spill in 2008, the electric utility paid over $1 billion and spent over 5 years to clean it up. The secret chemtrail program receives fly ash from coal-fired power plants at a very low cost, since the power plant operators are trying to get rid of the ash. Railroad or barge transportation makes it easy to move millions of tons of processed fly ash to secret air bases. All coal electric utilities use transportation, such as railway, to bring coal to the plant. Therefore, it's very easy to remove the fly ash. The low cost of the fly ash, the existing processing facilities, the easy transportation, all out in the open, and the lack of public awareness concerning coal waste make fly ash the ideal source material for the secret chemtrail program. Patent number 5003186 describes cooling the Earth with metal oxides sprayed into the stratosphere. Fly ash has the right size and mixture of metal oxides, so a minimum amount of processing is needed to create a ready-to-spray, water-based chemtrail slurry. Coal fly ash has the correct size, 10 to 100 microns according to the patent, to be used as a Welsbach reflective material when sprayed in the upper atmosphere. In addition to aluminum, rainfall testing shows a variety of toxic metals, which are all found in coal ash, depending on the source of the coal. This rainfall test from Chico, California has high readings in aluminum and barium. This rainfall test from Alachua County, Florida shows high aluminum every day and high barium on a single day. Coal ash is composed primarily of oxides of silicon, aluminum, iron, calcium, magnesium, titanium, thallium, sodium, potassium, arsenic, mercury, and sulfur, plus small amounts of radioactive uranium and thorium. Barium, Ba, is always present in coal ash and is found in most chemtrails. This California rainfall test shows aluminum, barium, and strontium over a 2-month period in January 2014. Fly ash with low barium may have barite mined and added before spraying. Coal ash has dangerous amounts of radioactive uranium, radium, and thorium. Chemtrailed areas are being poisoned with depleted uranium, naturally occurring uranium-238. Radioactive uranium is found in all coal ash. Radioactive thorium is a Welsbach material and is found in the most common type of coal ash, bituminous and subbituminous. Welsbach Materials patent shows how aluminum oxide, thorium oxide, and other metal oxides can reflect sunlight back into space in an attempt to cool the planet. However, barium is not mentioned as a Welsbach reflective material. If barium is not a reflective metal, why is it being found in chemtrail rainwater tests? According to Jim Phelps, the father of the chemtrail program, barium is used to remove fluoride from the atmosphere caused by coal-burning air pollution, before the fluoride can create methane from other hydrocarbons, which is called cracking. 1 million metric tons of fluorine are released worldwide each year according to scientific measurements. These fluoride compounds are extremely strong greenhouse gases, about 8,000 times worse than carbon dioxide, for trapping heat in the Earth's atmosphere. According to the Jim Phelps documents, chemtrails must be sprayed to protect the world from hydrogen fluoride, which is created by burning coal. This is circular logic, i.e., artificial coal ash clouds must be used to save the Earth from burning coal? Why not have 100% fluoride scrubbers on all power plant smokestacks? Why not stop all coal burning? Chemtrail skeptics say it is impossible to create and purify a worldwide supply of aluminum, barium, and strontium and other metal oxides without being detected. Every coal-fired power plant has an area for processing the coal ash for either disposal or for reprocessing and shipping to another area. Skeptics say chemtrails don't exist because it is impossible to create and transport so much spray mix all over the country without someone finding out. Coal ash is already shipped all over the country using trucks, rail cars, and barges, so it is easy to move the chemtrail mix out in the open to USAF and secret air bases all over the USA and Europe. Here is a map of coal ash plants in the USA. Use Google Maps to see which ones have reprocessing plants for processing the chemtrail slurry. Make your own custom map at southeastcoalash.org. Local groups near the coal ash plants can write down the numbers on railroad bulk cargo cars when they leave the coal ash reprocessing plants. These same railroad tanker cars will be seen arriving at chemtrail air bases. This will identify which coal-burning power plants are supplying the chemtrail materials. Public disclosure, lawsuits, and nonviolent civil disobedience can stop the filling and movement of these railroad cars. Stopping these rail cars will stop the chemtrail program. We must also stop burning coal and stop the unregulated reprocessing of coal ash. Now that we know where chemtrails come from, we have the power to end the chemtrail program, which is killing our planet. All coal-fired electric generators and their coal ash processing plants must be tightly regulated worldwide to end the spraying of toxic metals from jet tankers and the release of deadly fluoride into the air. Why would the owners of coal-fired power plants want to help with chemtrails? Who would benefit from distracting people from coal smokestack pollution? The polluters, folks like the Koch brothers, who make profits based on lack of regulations of the pollution they produce on a daily basis. Anything which distracts people from the actual pollution caused by large fossil fuel producers like the Koch brothers helps them suppress efforts to regulate the pollution. The Koch brothers have invested millions of dollars to promote climate change as a hoax, because if taken seriously, it would create higher costs which would reduce their profits. It makes perfect sense for the Koch brothers to shift the blame for higher levels of pollution away from their own industries and onto the government, since it makes their pollution less noticeable and therefore less likely to be regulated. Chemtrails will suddenly end when the owners of the coal plants learn that attorneys, government regulators, and the ICC are planning to prosecute them. Prosecuting the billionaire criminals is the goal we must work toward. So forward this video to activists, attorneys, and government regulators. When you pay for coal-fired electricity, you are paying for chemtrail poisons that are slowly killing you, your family, and all future generations. Refuse to buy electricity from any utility that burns coal. Worldwide, we must use nonviolent civil disobedience and legal tools such as lawsuits, financial penalties, and state and federal regulation to stop deadly chemtrail spraying. Get involved in watching your local coal plant, railroad, or air base. We have the power to save our planet. There is still time if we all do our part. We must mass produce proven carbon-free energy sources. One example is the quantum electric generator with the free construction PDF download. Think about how you can help and do it. If you don't help, the spraying will continue. A single neighborhood group can stop the toxic spraying in your area. Search YouTube how to stop chemtrails in HAARP. Get involved. Complaining does nothing. Watch the PBS documentary A Force More Powerful to see how nonviolent civil disobedience can overpower any tyrannical evil. Don't search for your heroes somewhere else. We are the heroes we've been waiting for. Thanks for watching.
We've got a bit of an unusual situation. Now, this first portion of the radar cycle, fairly bland and typical, but then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow, believe it or not. Military aircraft flying through the region dropping chaff. Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is.
So let's say we were doing geoengineering because we wanted to make the weather a little bit better.
There will be monsoon failures during that period. There will be huge hurricanes. The global studies indicate there will be some impact on precipitation patterns.
Might involve large-scale regional agricultural disruption lasting a number of years.
Potentially 2 billion people could have their food disrupted by such interventions.
That the aerosols can, at least in these model simulations or indicated by these simulations, can offset most climate change in most places most of the time for both precipitation and runoff. But it's likely to cause some damage in some places.
Has been the aluminum in the vaccines. I wrote several articles about the effect of the adjuvants in vaccines, including the mercury and the aluminum effect. Then I found some articles about the chemtrails, and there was a lot being said about it, and I wasn't too sure whether it was true or not, because in my state we rarely saw them. But as I started looking on the internet, and I would see these states in which there were these crisscross patterns, and they were very tight patterns, and these geometrical shapes, where it was obvious it was a purposeful covering of the atmosphere with these patterns. And the trails were so long. Well, now we're starting to see them in my state, and as I look at them, they go from horizon to horizon. Well, I've been alive long enough to know that jets never did that in the past. And I see the same patterning effect now where they're crisscrossing. It's an obvious pattern. And so I looked into the literature and some of the reports and YouTube videos, and they were saying that they were dropping one of the ingredients was aluminum. Well, I had done a fair amount of writing and research on the effect of aerosolized chemicals in the nose when you breathe them. And what we knew was that these particles tend to travel along the olfactory nerves, which are the smell nerves in the nose, and it travels directly to the part of the brain that has to do with memory and emotions, the hippocampus, the entorhinal area, and the prefrontal cortex, and that you can trace these chemicals traveling along that nerve and depositing in this area of the brain. The other thing that was known is that if you aerosolize aluminum, it's one of the metals that passes very easily along this track and directly into the brain, so it bypasses the blood-brain barrier and goes directly into the brain and accumulates. Well, if you do it in animals, it produces lesions or damage in that area of the brain, and the animal will begin to show changes of memory and learning and emotional changes, and the levels continue to accumulate. So we have compelling evidence that aerosolized aluminum alone will enter the brain and produce damage to that critical area of the brain. The worst of all is the nanosize. Now, nanosize means you make it such a small particle that it easily penetrates skin, it penetrates barriers in the body that normally metals cannot pass through. When you nanosize and produce these incredibly small particulate matter, it passes very easily. So when you nanosize aluminum and you use it in these aerosols through the nasal passages, it enters the brain in very high concentrations. And they find that the nanosized aluminum in the brain is infinitely more toxic. Now, one of the toxic reactions to aluminum is intense inflammation and activation of cells in the brain that are the immune cells called microglia. Aluminum is a very potent activator of these immune cells, and that triggers the release of a powerful substance called glutamate, which is an excitotoxin. It causes cells to die from an excitatory mechanism, kind of complex mechanism, but it is a combination of inflammation and excitotoxicity. And I coined the term in the medical literature called immunoexcitotoxicity to describe that process. So we know that occurs. We know it occurs very easily. Now, the reports are coming out now that what they're spraying is nano-sized aluminum, and the idea is the whole concept of preventing global warming. And they nano-size the aluminum so it'll stay in the upper atmosphere longer, supposedly as a reflective compound, metal. The problem with that, even from a climatologic description, is that if you make it into cirrus-like clouds rather than reflecting it upward and out of the atmosphere, it reflects the heat downward and actually causes global warming. So you could envision that they're doing this on purpose to make the atmosphere heat up so they can see the atmosphere is warming up. But what I'm concerned about mainly is the medical effect, and that's because of this very strong connection between aluminum passing through this pathway into the brain is so strongly connected with Alzheimer's disease and other diseases of memory. If you're aerosolizing this and spraying literally tons of it over the world, and people are constantly breathing that aerosolized nano-sized aluminum, which will easily penetrate filters in your air-conditioned system, enter your home. So you're breathing it 24 hours a day, producing high levels of aluminum in this part of the brain, and the consequences could be absolutely devastating. It could cause a huge increase in Alzheimer's disease and inflammatory neurological disorders. Now, I watched YouTube, which was a geoengineering conference that the government had put on, and from the examination by biologists and scientists around the world is that the aluminum level in the lakes and streams and trees is increasing enormously. Some areas have incredible elevations of aluminum in the groundwater and in the vegetation. So if this indeed is happening, we're looking at a medical catastrophe.
Is what many are calling the chemtrail geoengineering footprint of aluminum, barium, and strontium.
We're finding this well-thought footprint internationally, all over the world, wherever they take samples and get a chemical analysis of rain and snow water. This is quite common. Wherever you see the jet chemtrails go over, you're going to get aluminum, barium, strontium coming down on.
Why would we not believe it's happening when what we see in the sky matches exactly the expressed goal of numerous geoengineering patents, about 160 or more? Why would we not believe this is happening when every element showing up in the rain tests are the primary elements named in those geoengineering patents? Why would we not believe this is happening when we have escalating levels in very short time frames, as short as 5 years? We see rain levels of aluminum, for example, escalating as much as 50,000%. California air quality studies do not show these metals migrating from China, and it's of recent origin. So, this bombardment of heavy metals that's raining down on us is coming from somewhere. Why would we not believe geoengineering is occurring when the weather patterns are so altered here in exactly the manner stated by geoengineers and reports on the consequences for geoengineering, which are diminished rainfall, which are increased ozone destruction? We have a massive ozone hole in the northern hemisphere now.
Should aluminum be in the soil in the rain? And yes, it should be in the soil. It's naturally there, always was there. And should it be in the rain? Well, absolutely not. But the standard reply has been, your samples are contaminated. But since we are getting samples now that show zero aluminum, and we're getting lots of barium and strontium and zero aluminum, so that just proves that if there was dirt in our samples of some sort, dust blown up from the ground, we should get some aluminum in some detectable quantity.
The primary ingredients in geoengineering are specifically the oxides of metals, including aluminum oxide. This is devastating to plants, totally devastating. The trees are dying. Why? Approximately 2 years ago, I rode in the back, and you can ride in the back of my place for miles. You can go all the way through the woods, creeks and everything, and it was, I say was, gorgeous. And the day before yesterday, I took a ride, and I rode in the back, and what I found was total devastation.
As I pointed out before, Michael, we're seeing, as in this example here, very hardy native plants completely flash out dead. That looks like it's been hit with some kind of a chemical. And we've only seen this in the last couple of years, and there's another one there, back over there. We're seeing mature madrone trees, which are 70, 80 feet high, flash out dead, just like this. USDA refuses to investigate it.
The pH typically around here should be about 5.6. Well, since the contrailing got heavy, I watched the pH here in these forests, well, go up, I guess would be the word. From 5.6, it went about 20 times more alkaline.
Well, they say the government is dumping chemicals on us to control or manipulate the weather.
And they say the unusual-looking jet trails in the sky are actually chemical-laden chemtrails. It's a belief gaining popularity here in Colorado. So, is there really poison in the sky? Fox 31's Heidi Hammett investigates.
Poison?
Who paints the morning sky?
Lines in the sky.
Brilliant, bright white blues.
Strange circles.
What chemicals they use, I do not know.
Peculiar patterns.
And I saw grids and grids, planes flying back and forth.
For thousands of people in Colorado.
I think they're spraying chemicals.
Across the country and around the world.
It's scary. It is very scary.
It is a mile-high mystery.
They say when you see those jet contrails in the sky that don't disappear, that's proof that the government is using planes to spray chemicals into the atmosphere to manipulate or control the weather. Turning normal jet contrails into chemical trails or chemtrails.
Because they're using government planes that are unmarked.
And while some call the concept crazy,
So when they say, no, there's nothing going on, I don't believe that.
Rosalind Peterson says it's anything but.
I think that this is terribly serious in the United States.
The former USDA crop inspector, who was invited to speak at the UN Conference on Climate Change in 2007, has been tracking the government's research on weather modification and something called geoengineering, a way of fighting global warming by putting chemicals like aluminum and barium into the atmosphere to create clouds which reflect the sun's rays.
Geoengineering is to make a change which is unnatural.
She says the suspicious-looking sky shows the government is already experimenting with the weather. And that's why health department records show a sharp increase in barium and aluminum in California's water supply.
Why would we be finding barium and aluminum and other chemicals in our drinking water and have man-made clouds persisting for 20 hours or more?
That's why Golden says we will soon see more weather modification programs, including geoengineering, in the near future. The U.S. Senate right now calling for more weather modification programs. And while scientists say it's one way to reduce greenhouse gases, opponents say the consequences could be devastating.
All of these things change the growing cycles.
Peterson says altering the amount of sunlight that hits the earth will lead to damaged crops, dead and dying trees, and the disappearance of honeybees.
Then I think we're going to be in more trouble than ever before.
So is it a contrail or a conspiracy? No matter who or what you believe, thousands of people are left wondering, looking to the cloudy skies for an answer that is clear. Heidi Hemmett, Fox 31 News.
Well, the U.S. military has been known to manipulate the weather in the past. During the Vietnam War, they used cloud seeding to make it rain over supply routes used by the North Vietnam.
How can I look my children in the eyes and not try to shed the light on this issue, knowing every breath they take is laden with these metals? I have been forced to conclude that there is no greater or no more immediate threat to anything that lives and breathes than the global geoengineering programs short of nuclear catastrophe.
Geoengineering is defined as the artificial modification of the Earth's climate. Geoengineers are proposing spraying 10 to 20 million tons of toxic aluminum and other substances into our sky for the stated goal of cooling our planet.
So let me distinguish these two different kinds of geoengineering as clearly as I can. So the first one is we call solar radiation management, and that's the idea that you could put mostly reflective particles or other means to make the Earth whiter, effectively to increase the Earth's reflectivity, reducing the amount of heat that's absorbed by the sun, and therefore exerting some overall cooling tendency on the Earth.
I think, though the initial results of climate models indicate that reflection of sunlight away from the Earth can offset most climate change in most places most of the time. But it will damage some places.
We've mostly thought about sulfur, and nevertheless there might be some good reasons to think about aluminum. It turns out, first of all, there's been a lot of work on the environmental consequences of aluminum in the stratosphere. There's a bunch of papers going back to the 70s that look at the radiative and ozone-destroying properties of aluminum in the stratosphere, and those make you think it might be useful. Do this in just a jet in a very simple way. Make high-quality aluminum particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly in principle.
What you're seeing right there is two chemtrail planes chasing after another plane. Here's a couple of French planes. These planes will show you how aerosols can be turned on and off. Very obvious here. A plane just turned on the aerosol spray. The other one had it on. The other two have nothing coming out at all. And this is obviously an aerosol of some kind. There, that plane turned it off. That plane turned it on. All four planes are flying. All four have an exhaust. Yet, now here you've got two planes spraying, chasing another plane. The other plane is in the middle to the right a little bit. You can see it there. It's a small dot. Same speed. The altitude's probably exactly the same, or possibly the altitude of the plane that's not spraying anything is higher. Now, you know, a lot of people, pilots, everybody else will come on board and they'll say, well, it's just a contrail. It's just normal exhaust. Well, there you've got the plane stopped spraying right there, and the other plane continues to fly. Okay, Mr. Pilots and debunkers, where is that other plane? Did it just turn the engine off? I don't think so. It stopped spraying. So they started to spray right there. Does that mean that the temperature suddenly changed there? And, oh wait, okay, the temperature changed there. Oh wait, but the other plane's right at the same altitude and it's still spraying. No temperature change happened there. That other plane stopped spraying.
There is a growing citizens movement demanding an explanation of chemtrails.
And I talked to my NSA buddies at Fort Carson, Peterson Air Force Base, and Buckley, where I was actually their doctor taking care of the pilots flying and spraying the chemtrails. So I know it's real. If anybody says
it's not the same as conducting some localized test for some defensive project. This is open air operations. It's not a test. This thing is in place.
Talking about this a few years ago was extremely dangerous. Now that we have YouTube and more social networking devices, this is really getting out in such a way that they can't control a thing over this, because they can't control people now talking about the elephant in the room, what is so obvious to all of us.
There's a feeling from that area that the states doing all of these weather modification programs might not be doing it for the benefit of the citizens of Texas and other states that they may impact as well.
Well, many of the planes that we're seeing here in Abilene will actually turn whatever they're spraying on and off right before our eyes. I mean, you'll see a plane up there flying like normal, and then all of a sudden it starts spraying. We've seen them fly off into the distance and then loop around and fly back again. These are not your typical planes with a preordained path destination from city to city. Someone needs to explain to me, why do they stop traveling in one particular direction and then loop around and come back again? They perform this behavior so many times that we start seeing the tic-tac-toe grids in the sky. We're witnessing the giant X's. And I mean, Rosalind, when you and I grew up, these contrails naturally dissipated in a few seconds or perhaps a minute max. But these things expand, they grow bigger, and before you know it, the entire sky is overcast.
That's correct. And they are there all day. They do loop the loop around our county and our state. We follow them at times with spotters in different areas, watching the planes loop, come back around. And we know from the FAA records that the jets from commercial airlines fly in straight lines. And coming across our county, there aren't many, and they stay mostly in certain patterns. The jets that we see leaving the persistent jet contrails move in directions that normal jets wouldn't fly because it would use too much fuel and put them off schedule. And the jets that we see here do loops. We've got pictures of them looping the same X's and crosshatches. But I believe that some of that, not only are they looking for keeping something in the air almost all the time, but we feel that some of the markings are to mark the start and stop areas for their programs so that they can watch their experiments either from satellite or the ground.
lost sunshine hitting the planet right now is beyond belief. If people look up the term global dimming, they will see that fully 20% of the sun's rays that reached the planet several decades ago are no longer reaching the planet. I mean, that's a profound change that few people even know is. Where is this mountain of metal coming from? Why is asthma, ADD, Alzheimer's, autism, all elements related in many studies to aluminum or particulate inhalation? Why are these ailments going off the charts with no apparent explanation? Why has respiratory mortality in the continental United States gone from 8th on the list to 3rd in 6 years? And no one seems to ask any questions. Why every other person has asthma now? Why every other commercial on TV is an allergy medication?
One of the things that geoengineering is about when you're environmentally doing something with the atmosphere is that you can be engaged in weather modification. Historically, weather modification in the United States began to be looked upon in the 1940s as something that people would want to do. And so they started looking at making it enhancing snow, enhancing rain. They started looking at hurricane control. There was a whole bunch of projects in the 40s that started. One was Project Storm Fury, which turned into a disaster when they tried to modify a hurricane.
I'm Mark McCandlish. And for the better part of 30 years, I worked in the aerospace and defense industry. I had a secret clearance twice during my career. Some of the technology that I saw or participated in the creation of tends to play a role in some of the things that are used to control the weather. The very distribution process is being employed in the aerosol campaign, manipulating the weather, crops, taking over the food production or controlling the food production. The military applications, the process evolved when they realized in the 1800s that you can put things into the environment that will influence the uptake of moisture and where it drops out of the atmosphere again.
My name is Scott Stevens. I was a television weatherman for 20 years. These chemtrails are absolutely required to impact whatever weather event they were designing. And the trails were an absolute necessary ingredient for them to achieve their weather modification goals. So we're finding the aerosols, the metal particulates, all of those can be used and leveraged to create weather events that are several standard deviations or outside what would be typically normal. When the geoengineering really got underway with the Russians in the mid-70s, we ended up with snow in Miami. We ended up with frost deep into Mexico. The bizarreness of the weather really exploded on the scene when weather engineering got going in the mid-70s.
When you push and pull the climate with these manipulation programs, of which there's a mountain of data to corroborate their existence, then you start to have massive fluctuations in the system. And we saw in March in the continental U.S. there were 15,232 temperature records broken. That's profound. Some of the daytime highs, the former records were broken by as much as 32 degrees. Don't people wonder what in the world is going on?
Whether they want to make it snow at 45, 46, 47 degrees. I remember when 38, 39 was a big deal. Those kind of snowfalls in the upper 30s, and now that's been pushed into the 40s.
There's a patent called ice nucleation for weather modification. This is a patent from NASA. It can be found online in its full form. This patent is for the creation of artificial snowstorms from what would have been rainstorms. However preposterous it sounds to people, if they look up Chinese create snowstorms, they will find a long list of articles where the Chinese Bureau of Weather Modification openly admitted that they were creating snowstorms until they did $1 billion worth of damage in Beijing. So my question would be, if the Chinese can do this and NASA has a patent for the same purpose, why would we believe snow events here are natural when it's snowing now regularly at 45 degrees, sometimes 50 degrees, heavy, wet concrete snow that's full of aluminum, full of barium, full of strontium. Consider the ice pack in their first aid kit that can sit dormant at room temperature for decades until the chemicals are mixed together, at which time it creates ice.
As an on-air meteorologist, I had a responsibility to my audience. There were storms that were not behaving as they were modeled, or they historically would have responded.
If you can control where moisture is collected and where it's dropped, so to speak, in the form of rain or any other kind of precipitation, then you can really, you can do everything. You can steer the weather system. If you want to be able to manipulate the weather, one of the things we know about the materials that are being used in the aerosols, we've seen everything from aluminum oxide, barium salts, strontium, copper sulfate, potassium iodide, a number of different kinds of things, each of which have different levels of reactivity with the moisture in the air. Some, like aluminum oxide, tends to sequester the moisture. The aluminum oxide nanoparticles, which are microscopically fine and uniform in size, attract the humidity, the moisture in the air, and it basically forms like a nucleation process where the moisture condenses on these particles.
With cloud seeding, the cooling will be achieved by making clouds reflect a bit more sunlight back to space than they would otherwise, and less sunlight reaching the surface would tend to cool the planet. These aerosol particles act as something called cloud condensation nuclei, and these are sites where these particles act as sites where cloud drops can form.
Well, the one thing that we know has happened is because these are nanoparticles and they float like mad with a little bit of moisture added to them, they go over the Continental Divide and they dump all of California's rain into the Mississippi Valley, which is the reason they're having floods and tornadoes and fierce storms and odd weather back east. The effect here in California is drought.
Now then, if you hit that area of the sky with a beam of a particular kind of radiation, and you can heat those particles up, just like heating up, your cup of coffee in the microwave, these particles begin to vibrate and resonate if you use the right frequency of RF energy, that they then heat the surrounding air, and they will take all of that air and the moisture that's in it to a higher altitude where it's much colder, and it'll condense and then become a low pressure system.
Then as the storm approaches, the high begins to recede, and then they're running the flights back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and literally seeding the leading edges of the cirrus. So the cirrus canopy is accentuated. That cirrus canopy, which would maybe be 200-300 miles out ahead of a cold front, is now 450 miles.
Based on geoengineering data, it would appear the Pacific Northwest gets an excessive amount of the fallout from these programs because much of the weather, much of the precipitation and the storm tracks and the jet stream move across us. So as stated by globally recognized geoengineers like David Keith, that's the type of area they would want to seed these particulates as incoming fronts start to cover landfall. And that's exactly what we see here. When there's any kind of incoming front, we see jets everywhere.
Also influence what happens locally with the atmosphere by painting the materials that these aerosols are made of with different kinds of radio frequency or RF energy, radar, microwave, the HAARP system.
HAARP is an array, a field of antennas, radio frequency antennas. They're 72 feet tall, and they have a cross dipole across the top that's about 60 feet in each direction. 180 of these are in the array today, so you can imagine this field of antennas. What happens is by firing each one, they produce radio frequency energy that normally comes off of an antenna, spreads out rather rapidly. Same principle. Principles in physics would be like a flashlight shining on a wall. You start with a narrow beam, and by the time you hit the wall, you've got a wide beam. The idea with HAARP is to get it to focus or concentrate that radio frequency energy so it doesn't spread out. So you can hold it tighter together and then manipulate it in very specific ways. Weather control is a broad topic, so there's lots of ways to control and manipulate weather. HAARP is one of them, because you also have private sector companies getting into this business of weather modification. In the case of HAARP, do you need, people always ask me, do you need particulates dispersed in the atmosphere to make more effective? You actually don't. Would it make things more possible? Could you enhance certain effects? Probably so. Could you control energy distributions more efficiently? Probably so, because you're putting in conductors or you're putting in reflectors, you're putting in particulate material.
If you've ever experienced a hailstorm and you've picked up one of the hailstones and you slice it open with a razor blade, you'll see that it's layer upon layer upon layer of ice. Now, hail is usually formed where you have a low pressure system where there's a tremendous updraft of air. When the air gets warmed up by the sunlight ahead of the storm, the air rises, it takes the moisture that's in the air up to a higher altitude where it's much colder. The moisture begins to condense into water droplets, but the updraft is so powerful that the water is carried to extreme altitudes where it freezes. And it begins to fall, and as it falls, it starts to be caught up in the updraft again, so it's circulated up into the air again, and so each time it's lofted up into the atmosphere, more of the moisture that is condensing on the outside of this nuclei of ice begins to form another layer, and each time it's caught back in the updraft, it goes up again and it gets another layer of ice. And so if you have a system like HAARP working in conjunction with aerosols, ChemTrails that are spraying in the air, you can actually create updrafts that are so powerful that you can have these hailstone circulation patterns going over and over again, where you get hailstones the size of baseballs or even softballs.
Weather has always been a strategic desire to control by the generals, whether it was Napoleon marching towards Moscow, or Hitler in his Russian campaign, or our own Pacific Fleet trying to understand typhoons and use them for our strategic advantage. War and weather are very closely connected, and they've been connected ever since about 1812 or so, maybe earlier than that. Hannibal had to face the snows in the Alps. And so there's a long history of weather and warfare interactions.
Environmental manipulation is like the ultimate method of covert warfare, because you can literally shut down food production. You can create a situation where the people within a country revolt against their own government, and you're invited in to mop up the mess. The issue of owning the weather by 2025, it's just a military publication. We've quoted it as far back as, I think, 94, 95 even. But you go back to these earlier reports and you look at sort of what was the objective, and the objective is exactly that: control the battlefield environment. Environmental factors give you an absolute advantage. If you can weaken your adversary before you have to fire the first bullet, maybe you even win the war.
Whether it's incredibly historic sandstorms when we're invading Iraq, or you want to drought out or flood out a dictator that you're not happy with.
Do you believe that this is a full-scale secret operation that includes not only the U.S. but Europe and the rest of the world?
Well, that's apparent because you can see the pictures from all over the world, and I get them constantly. Some areas are worse than others. The excuse for this is
that we are on.
Could a strange substance found by a southwest...
spraying that chemtrail? Nope. Feels like we're above it. I know. Oh, this would be dead right now.
Can create weather systems that are so severe they culminate in battlefield denial, where the enemy is not able to use the roads or the bridges or get through the environment because the weather is so severe. And you can use the weather to destroy his crops, deny him a food source, destabilize his population because people get hungry. When they're hungry, they get angry and nasty and they don't like what's happening. So there's lots of different things that you can do with the materials. It's all how you use them in the environment, how you apply it.
One of the biggest concerns of early cloud seeding, weather control activities by the General Electric Corporation came from their lawyers who thought that the corporation was totally vulnerable to lawsuits because if they started to make fair or foul weather, the people down below in Massachusetts or downwind of Schenectady could institute massive lawsuits that could put GE out of business. So the first response to weather control from their in-house lawyers was to shut it down, was to give the project to the military and ask them to do it, with the GE lawyers only being the consultants on the project. So they were allowed to suggest and design certain activities, but they weren't allowed to touch anything or throw anything out of the plane.
The United States government during the Vietnam War perfected weather modification techniques, and also they perfected releasing toxic chemicals like Agent Orange over many areas to defoliate land, trees, grasslands, and other areas.
But this is technology that does come up, and it comes up when you see that the technology advanced far enough to where the practicality of utilizing it in the battlefield environment and the temptation by administrations. I mean, the best covert war is using the environment itself against your adversary.
It was a military moment, and it was actually from pretty recent history. And this was the U.S. military thinking that they might be able to control the monsoon over Vietnam during that conflict. And so only a handful of top-level military advisors and the president were informed that they were going to try to make it rain over the Ho Chi Minh Trail and try to have some military advantage by doing this kind of intervention.
When you start talking about manipulating the environment, we have treaties that go back to the mid-70s that forbid this, number one, as weapons of war.
So the perfection of weather modification took place, but it became apparent that using weather modification for wartime purposes was not acceptable to the United States government and other nations of the world. So therefore, the NMOD Treaty came into being and was signed by the United States government after passing Congress. The reason it was signed and implemented was because it would ban warfare, weather modification techniques and use during times of war.
Almost all of our treaties that we've signed, including the non-proliferation, counter-proliferation treaties, chemical treaties, the ones that were signed recently, last few years, back maybe a decade now, I guess time goes. But they had domestic exemptions, and so does the environmental treaty, where you can do whatever you want in your own territorial boundaries. When you start manipulating weather in one part of the planet, it doesn't look on the ground and say, oh yeah, wait, this is the boundary of a political boundary. It fails to recognize those. So you start to talk about geophysics and manipulating the planet itself. Then it's a question of those kinds of exemptions shouldn't even be allowed.
Meteorology and the military have a very long history, as I said, and it goes into the strategic advantage that multiplies your traditional force, that is your armament, into using nature to your advantage as well.
they want to create a storm in the southeast, then they'll start engineering out over the North Pacific. That's where the trailies will be, because you want to work out several days ahead of time so you have less input, and you multiply that over a couple of days, you can have a big result in 5 days' time. So small input upstream, big result downstream. And one of the rules is always work with what's coming. Don't try to necessarily work against it. You can kill a storm in place. That's easy to do with HAARP. You just change the polarization, you change the ionization of the atmosphere, and the storm will fall apart.
It will affect the setting up of the storm tracks, the jet stream, the location of the storms. And so you end up with an intervention on the solar side of things would pretty directly begin to affect the weather patterns. And so climate control, or attempted climate control, and weather control rely on this very large spectrum of intervention. It's also true that if you can forecast climate, you can control a lot of futures markets, and you could know if you had the best information, or if you had some leverage over what the climate system is going to turn out to be, you would be able to invest in advance in all your crop futures and your agricultural activities, and not just agriculture, but weather effects. I think it's something like 80% of the U.S. economy is weather sensitive, and so all kinds of businesses would like to see some weather edge, some advantageous information that they would have.
It's absolutely entirely possible to profit from the weather.
My name is Michael Agney. I'm an independent trader. Trading commodities at the CME Group, member of the Chicago Board of Trade, and have traded derivatives and futures cash for over 15 years. Weather derivatives are financial instruments that firms would use to hedge risk concerned with adverse weather conditions. The first weather derivative was originally traded by Enron back in 1997. Weather derivatives started in 1999 at the CME Group. Big utilities, reinsurers to hedge against hurricanes or tornadoes or flooding, some sort of catastrophe, hedging against a cooler summer or a warmer winter. Let's just say I was insuring a product for $5 million, no matter what it was. Let's say if I was a utility company, a farmer, whatever it was. Let's say I had $5 million worth of crop, but I can do derivatives that are worth double that amount, and I can control the effects to where I collect on the insurance that's worth $10 million as opposed to selling the crop for $5 million. Yes, I could definitely profit from that. 2010, 2011, Southern Illinois, Missouri, those, you know, we had a high peak of tornadoes and those types of adverse weather conditions definitely raised the price of commodities as well as drove the volatility, which also raises the price of commodities. You're going to make more money if a crop fails. You're creating insurance that's over the price of what your crop is worth, let's say. So if you can control the weather, you control how these products grow. And if you had an insight to how these products were actually seeded and what products you use to actually grow those items, corn, soybeans, and you can control that market, it's unlimited profit potential if you can control the weather.
If you want to send, cold into the Midwest, you buy up pipeline capacity, you buy up options on heating and cooling degree days, you buy derivatives off of rainfall. There are mechanisms that you can make hundreds of billions of dollars annually and defray a huge chunk of the cost of this just on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, playing with derivatives in the weather market.
Weather derivatives are basically, you're betting that there's going to be a weather disaster, and you're betting that it's going to occur within a particular time frame in a particular location, and then, the money that you put up basically is like a bet. It's like a wager, saying that this incident's going to happen here, and then when it does happen, there's a big payoff. And that big payoff is something that motivates people to continue to participate in this kind of thing and maybe even feed the very process that's causing the bad weather to happen. Particularly if there's a connection between the people that are seeding the clouds and the people that are making investments.
This is a new opportunity. It's a new tool for investors. Even if someone has no interest in, going on the offensive side and buying things, it definitely behooves them to be aware of what's going on out there. The extreme weather is here, and it's not going to reverse itself. The weather event has to be severe.
Ionosphere heating, in fact, these instruments, when they were first utilized, which is in the former Soviet Union back in the 70s. They started out, and they still call these ionospheric heaters, because in one mode of operation, you can literally create above this instrument on the ground, you can heat an area up to 30 miles in diameter in the ionosphere. So you heat it up, and by heating it, it literally raises it. So then imagine this column moving up several hundred kilometers out, and then the lower atmosphere begins to rush in and fill that vacant space, that void. And as a result, you're altering pressure systems for quite a distance, which of course alters the weather. You're also able, if a jet stream is coming in the air, you're able to alter its course. And if you alter a jet stream, even a small amount, then the swing factor on the other end, you can move it. So you're moving storms, say, out of the Midwest onto the East Coast, or this kind of thing, by just swinging it high in terms of its flow and getting it redirected.
Okay, so now if we look at precipitation, much has been made of this issue of damage from precipitation.
Which the particulates that these trails have introduced into the sky are, let's just say the storms can develop more violently, more quickly, in places that are not necessarily as where you would expect them to be. And so we see more flooding. We see more intense droughts. We see rainfall rates of 1 to 2.25 inches an hour that are just bizarre. And sometimes even rainfall, 1.25 inches a minute is just unheard of.
And so you have an area that's already been heated by the sun's rays, and then you have the aerosol drift in over that area, and it's reflecting both ways. It's reflecting the heat of the sun back out, but it's also trapping the heat that's already been created there by the sunlight. So it will actually create more heat and trap heat inside and closer to the atmosphere. It can actually exacerbate global warming.
So the agenda was drought. The agenda was to kill the storm, at least in that one particular spot.
You see a tremendous and significant loss of property and crop production. Many times this will cause farms to go out of business, and when farmers go out of business, they usually have to sell, and then if there's somebody waiting in the wings to buy their land and then turn that land over to the production of genetically modified crops, you can see where there would be kind of a strategic advantage there.
There's something that happened in the Midwest, and I'm sure everybody's heard about the flooding in the Midwest, and what happened is George Soros and his big corporate monolith went in and started buying up the farmland. So not only is it creating all these stresses, it appears to be a corporate land grab. In other words, when the farmers, the small farmers, go out of business, they're wiped out through these droughts and everything, then the big guys come in, buy up the land.
And if you think of Western history, there's a lot of it concerning water rights and even water wars. And so they were shooting about access to water to water your livestock. And now people are thinking, or at least the people who are involved in weather control sometimes think about the river of moisture above our heads, and geez, if we could just tap that. But that too is a water right that would involve access to people that felt that maybe they had prior rights over it.
You're reducing the food security of people through deploying these kinds of approaches that
potentially 2 billion people could have their food disrupted by such interventions.
I've been an organic farmer my entire life. And I've been, in the last 8 years, been certified organic. And so I've been growing food in a way that feels healthy, where I have the most energy. And now it's not so healthy. I want to pass a really nice, healthy soil, rich soil, earth on to the children and have it be fertile.
Эксперимент номер 437. Предполагаемая продолжительность. Никто не может скрыться.
back the recording that when I called NASA yesterday and I spoke with someone in your Washington, D.C. office, I was told that he's scared to death. He's going to denounce his citizenship and go back to the Philippines.
Okay.
That's what I was told by NASA yesterday when I called.
Okay. And
Directly from your office.
Did you record that conversation with their knowledge?
Well, I'm sorry?
Did you record that conversation with their knowledge?
Are you recording my conversation with that knowledge, sir?
No.
I'm sorry?
No, I'm not recording any conversation.
You're not recording any conversation with my knowledge, and NASA isn't either, and you can't get through it anyway. If you want to leave a message, it rings and rings and then hangs up on you. Same with Wallop Island. So I would love to leave a message there. Could you give me a direct answer? Because it says you're the scientist here on the NASA website.
Yeah, I'm involved in the project, but...
You are a scientist, so then, and you know that this is experimental, you've never done it before?
No, it's been done in the 1970s, it's been done recently in the 1990s and 2000s.
Oh, that's not what it said on this article here.
3, 2, 1, 0, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
It hasn't been done since 1970, the lithium release in the daytime.
Why would it be done now then, sir? That's scary.
Detailed information. If you could please send your comments by email.
Okay, will you respond to my email if I send them?
Happy to answer them, yes.
You will. Okay, what was your email, sir?
Douglas.e.Roland, D-O-U-G-L-A-S.
Douglas. I'm sorry?
E.
Uh-huh.
Roland, R-O-W-L-A-N-D.
Uh-huh. At,
NASA.gov.
I'm sorry?
NASA.gov. NASA.gov.
Okay. Well, I will be expecting an email back from you then, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's very important we communicate what we're doing to the public. We're very interested in making sure everyone knows what we're doing. We're not, we're a civilian space agency dedicated to science and research and so on. So we're very, very keen to make sure that the taxpayers know what we're doing and everything. So.
Well, you know, when the article came out in the major newspapers, including the Huffington Post, there was no mention of lithium, not one. Not one mention of lithium. Until I heard the recording of the actual, I listened to it. I listened to the rockets go off. I had no idea there was going to be a lithium dispersed until I heard payload lithium dispersed.
Good indicators of chemical deploys. And lithium on Ontario Improved Divine have been deployed. Okay. RSO TDOSS request to declare the area clear and release the roadblocks.
TD concurs if RSO does.
RSO concurs. All right, copies. Yeah, the science team reports out that they do see the lithium trails. These lithium trails allow them to look at the winds and that of the ionosphere. And these winds are believed to be the carriers of the dynamic. Well, make sure everyone knows that we see the lithium from the airplane.
Roger that.
We've got good sine waves on the electric field. PI copies.
Right. There was lithium dispersed, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I think you might be under some misconceptions about what we're doing, but I'm happy to tell you any details that you need.
Well, I know that it says in your article that you're doing it for communications.
Okay, I'm happy to talk to you more about it. There are many reasons we're doing it.
Okay.
We don't understand how the wind in the upper atmosphere moves.
Mm-hmm.
In these chemtrails, there's different kinds of chemtrails, as you probably know. Different trails at night we use and different trails during the day. The wind blows them around. They glow either on their own or from scattered sunlight. We take pictures and we can see how the wind trail moves around and use that to infer what the wind is. Just like if you were taking a picture of an airplane contrail, you can use that to see how the wind was blowing up at those altitudes. This is much higher altitude, so we use these chemical trails.
And what is the purpose of knowing what the wind's going to do in the ionosphere?
The purpose is the ionosphere is really to understand our planet. It's very fundamental science. We're trying to understand day, we know there's electric currents that flow over the head. They're just naturally there. They've been there for, ever since the Earth had an atmosphere and a magnetic field. And the wind is driven by the sun. The sun heats the atmosphere, the wind blows, and every day that wind drives an electric current. And we're trying to understand what causes that. Essentially, how does it work in detail? And also importantly, when the sun becomes active with lots of sunspots and lots of magnetic activity, that changes the wind pattern and changes the electric current. So we want to understand both what it is on a regular day when there's no solar activity, and then what it is when there's a lot of solar activity.
Is there some other kind of a way that you can use it without dispersing the lithium?
We're researching other ways. The lithium is actually harmless to the environment, and we could show you more about that. But it is tricky to use because it's very faint. You can't see it with your naked eye. You have to, have special cameras to see it and so on. So we don't like to use it for that reason. It's hard. In other words, it's hard measurement to make. We're researching other ways to put sensors directly on the rocket to measure the wind, and those are ongoing. We're trying to develop those now. In fact, one of the purposes of this mission was to do that.
Okay. Well, you've explained it to me then. I don't agree with it, but I appreciate you explaining it to me.
Email too if you have detailed questions, anything you want.
Okay, I will. I'm gonna research it a little more, and I will email you. And I appreciate you taking the time out to speak to me today, sir.
Your call. It's not often we get to hear from members of the public and people who are really interested and concerned with what we're doing. And I really appreciate your time.
I wish more people would call. I really do. I've called my senators. I've called my governor. You can't get through to anyone, sir. You can't get through to anybody.
Yeah.
I go to my city council. I live in rural North Carolina. They don't care. They laugh you out of there. There's no other recourse for us, sir, unless to talk to people directly and find out what is going on, because we're paying for it. Just ask for the science department.
Well, I don't know what department they're in, but Larson, L-A-R-S-E-N, Miguel Larson is the lead, and he would be, as a government agency, we would not be allowed, to do anything that would be harmful. So he's under strict controls and that sort of thing. So he can explain it to you. He can even show you around, that sort of thing.
My statement was that it's criminal, and whoever's doing this should be charged with the criminal act. That this could kill thousands, if not millions, of people eventually. I mean, if you're inducing Alzheimer's disease on a worldwide scale, and you're inducing a number of diseases just from breathing it. I mean, within the lungs, you can produce asthma, you can produce chronic lung disease. People who have pre-existing chronic lung disease will precipitously get worse because aluminum, as it enters the epithelium of the lungs, is going to produce intense inflammatory reactions, and that's going to produce a worsening of their pulmonary conditions. Also, the aluminum is absorbed into the bloodstream, can be deposited in the heart. People with heart failure would get worse. People with hypertension would get worse. Numerous diseases could be precipitated and worsened by such an insane policy. But it is criminal. It's a criminal. I was asked permission to do this. This was not announced publicly. This was not entered into a public forum, so these health issues could be discussed. They just secretly have done it on a worldwide scale of an enormous proportion, dropping hundreds of thousands of tons of this product in the atmosphere. Well, the skeptics usually are people who are involved with government somehow, and that's their job. Their job is to debunk it. The problem is that we have people who are trained biologists who are taking water samples, like you say, from lakes and streams. We have biologists from all over the world that are sampling it from the leaves of trees and plants and the fauna in Hawaii, in the Pacific Northwest, in Arizona. So they're doing it all over. All of them are finding the same things. And of course, we have records of the levels of aluminum in the lakes and streams and vegetation that go back many, many decades. And so it's easy to compare. And what we see is over the last 10 years has been an astronomical increase in the aluminum, not just a minor variation, but an astronomical increase in the aluminum